Hello to everybody to our fourth session, I think this is, of our Pastoral Council Formation series. Tonight we are focusing on culture, which is something that we actually don't really talk about very often. When Danny and I were chatting earlier, we said this is a bit of the sort of, I don't know if it's invisible or if it's the elephant in the room. I don't know. I think Danny's going to enlighten us later anyway. But before we begin, we're going to have some prayer to start with. I just can see people still coming in, but I think, Chris, we're going to hand over to you for our opening prayer.
Good evening, everyone. Our prayer this evening, for those of us who were fortunate to be in Rome in October for the Jubilee of Synodal Bodies, our Mass with Pope Leo on the Sunday, this was the Gospel. And we're going to use the Gospel and also just a short excerpt from his homily this evening. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I'll read the Gospel and we'll have a few minutes of silence to just consider the words, consider what God is revealing to us this evening through those words. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified, rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. So for just a few moments, we call upon the Holy Spirit to be with us, to be in our hearts and minds, to speak to us through the words of this gospel. And also in response to this reading, we hear the words of Pope Francis from October last year. The supreme rule in the Church is love. No one is called to dominate. All are called to serve. No one should impose his or her own ideas. We must all listen to one another. No one is excluded. We're all called to participate. No one possesses the whole truth. We must all humbly seek and seek it together. We must dream of and build a more humble church, a church that bends down to wash the feet of humanity, a church that does not judge, but becomes a welcoming place for all, a church that does not close in on itself, but remains attentive to God, so that it can similarly listen to everyone. Let us commit ourselves to building a church that is entirely synodal, entirely ministerial and attracted to Christ, and therefore committed to serving the world. So just for a few moments, let's reflect on those words from Pope Francis. Consider the church in our local communities and how we live this out in our daily communities. If there is something, a word or a phrase that stands out and you would like to share it in the chat, please feel free to do that over the next few moments. And we give praise to God for our time this evening together, the time with Danny, and the time listening to the Holy Spirit through each other by saying, Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was beautiful and a lovely bit. A lovely bit of it was Pope Leo. I know it's our we love Pope Francis so much. It's a bit like when
Oh,
we
did I say Pope Francis?
you did, just in case
Sorry.
anybody was a little bit confused about that. So thank you, and an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous passage. Coincidentally, I used a bit of that text last night with a group up in Corby. So a really great reflection there for us. So tonight we are going to be thinking about culture, the way we work together, our behaviours, our culture, and not being a thorn in one another's side. And we're delighted to have with us as our guest speaker, Danny Curtin, who's a lead thinker, a fabulous facilitator, and coach in Catholic culture. Um, he is going to share some. Danny is always brilliantly practical, and I always very much enjoy conversations with him. So I'm very excited about tonight. I think we're going to learn a lot. If you're joining us for the first time tonight, the format of our evening is that I'll have a conversation with Danny, and then we'll have an open forum and we'll have questions from the floor via the chat. So if there's anything that you think like, well, how would I do that in my parish council meeting, or what does this look like really practically? Hold that thought because we will be looking for some questions from everybody when we get to that point. Anyway, I'm now delighted to turn to Danny, who's a leader in faith-based organisational culture with over 20 years' experience working with Catholic charities, dioceses, youth movements and leadership teams. He was the chief exec of Million Minutes, a wonderful Catholic youth charity, supported boards and pastoral teams in developing plans and strategies for the future, and is known for helping groups move from talking about mission to living it. So Danny, super, super excited to have you with us this evening. Thanks so much for being with us. And just as we get started, can you just give us a sense of what have been your experiences in this area, particularly around kind of culture, councils, that kind of thing?
Hi, Avril. It's great to be with you, and good evening, everyone. It's a privilege, really, to be with you all. And thank you for turning up. We need people like on this call in order to build the culture that we want in the church to sustain and improve our culture. What's my experience? I suppose, as you said in the introduction, it's been a couple of decades, really. I have to credit a lot of my foundation to the Young Christian Workers. I was a member of the Young Christian Workers when I was young. I was elected its president at a national level in my early 20s, and I was in leadership of that. And I learned an awful lot about what it means to come together and what we would now call synodality, what it means to listen deeply, what it means to share, what it means to discern, what it means to make decisions, what it means to act. And as a kind of young person, being accompanied really well in the church by our chaplains, then I kind of grew into myself. And it also gave me the gifts that I think I've got now in order to share that with others. It taught me to kind of train other people to be alongside other people and for me as an accompanier. And I suppose I've grown into being a facilitator of other people's work. So my purpose is to support other people of purpose, really. So I've been doing that for the last couple of decades, and I get to see so much. So I get to see organisations, dioceses, Catholic charities, and parishes, deaneries working together or not working so well together, and then working with them to see what we can do. So just last night, for example, I was on a call with a parish council synodal team, looking at where they're going next and how they're working. And it's just a privilege, really, to be in and out of people's pastoral work and to work with people as they're thinking about how they improve what they're doing. And I think we'll come on to some of the hows and the whats in a little moment. So yeah, started in youth work, but now work all across the church, and it's a real privilege to do so.
Thank you. So as we get started then, there's this word culture. It's massive word. It could be used for all kinds of things. Can you just give us a sense? How are we using it tonight?
I think the first thing I want to say, and I've just got two slides on this, I'm going to use slides a couple of times, is there's a very famous phrase that people like me use and organizations use and management use, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Why do we say things like that? Because this is talking about the difference of how we do things versus the kind of plans that we make. We can have all the plans that we like in life, but if actually the culture, the how we're doing things isn't sound, then actually our plans are going to go awry. And from that, I think, comes a very simple definition of culture. My favorite definition of culture, I haven't found one better yet, is simply the way we do things around here when no one else is watching,
Mm.
right? So you can find all sorts of intellectual academic definitions of it, but people joining this call that maybe think, oh, what do I know about culture? You know everything about culture because it's just the way we do things around here when no one else is watching. So think about those church meetings that you're in, right? Think about how you are in those meetings. That's the culture, right? Is it open, accepting? Does it feel creative, energizing? Or actually, are we tipping, standing on tiptoes around one another, treading on eggshells? Are we rushing? Does it feel like unprepared? Does it feel like it's a bit slapdash? You know what I mean? We can all think about the way we're doing things around here. Does it feel good? Does it feel fruitful? Does it feel creative? Does it feel healthy? Or actually, does it not feel like it's got the foundations that we might need for the work that we're doing? So in essence, I think, Avril, it's the how of how we're working, right?
Mm.
And it is, we see that in the behaviors and the practices. We see that in how we show up as individuals and how the group shows up and what we actually do together. But it is, in essence, the how we are. And the other important thing to say about culture as we begin is that it's everybody's responsibility to do it, right? It isn't just down to the leader, to the chair, to the priest, to whoever. It is everyone's responsibility to build a culture. And for that, as I'm going to say as we go through the next 20 minutes or so, It's got to be intentional. It's got to be deliberate. We set that. Otherwise, it gets set accidentally, and that's a really dangerous place to be when we have an accidental culture.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, I love this. I'm writing, I've got my pen in my hand. I'm writing things down already. Love it. Um, so just to kind of get us started then, how can a parish council cultivate a culture where every member feels safe to speak honestly, everybody is safe to listen? Like how do we get past that treading on eggshells?
I think we'll talk a bit more about this as we go through, but it is, I can say it's how we work, but at the heart of it is our behavior and our practices, right? So it's how we are individually showing up, how we're behaving, and what practices are we putting in place intentionally in order to improve our culture. So, um, I I think we therefore really are supported when we have a common understanding of what that means. So we talk about things like working together agreements or codes of conduct, right? And I think we can be very quick to dismiss those. We can be quick to go, oh, sounds a bit OTT, or might even not feel very kind of British, or and it's like, oh, we're gonna have to be very open and explicit about how we're gonna be. But I've learned over the years that if we start our meetings, our sessions, or the formation of our groups, our organizations, our councils, whatever, if we start very explicitly by saying, how do you want this group to be? How do you want this meeting to be? What are we signing up for? What's our expectation of one another? That really creates that safe space. It creates a space where we can show up as ourselves and we can cultivate a way of working which is going to enable everybody to participate, right? And it's going to avoid some of the pitfalls. So, for example, anyone that's seen me work at any point will probably know that I would always start with a working together agreement, right? There's plenty of them out there. This is one, I mean, I've actually put some of this together tonight for you, just knowing it's about pastoral councils, but in essence, it always includes 3 or 4 different sections. Personally, I always start with inviting whoever I'm got the privilege to be working alongside to enter into a meeting, enter into joining a new group with gratitude and generosity, right? They're both conscious choices. We can choose to be grateful to one another. We can choose to be generous to one another. And if we do that at the beginning of a meeting, at the beginning of joining a new group or council, then everything else will flow from that. I can be grateful to the person that's next to me that's also given up 2 hours on a wet evening to come out to this parish hall. And I can be generous to the people that are there, right? But then we can get a bit more practical if you wish, right? We talk particularly in pastoral councils and in working in parish synodal settings of gracious speaking and gracious listening. What does that actually mean, right? And actually, and these are just a few thoughts, but to always have respectful conversation, we know what that looks like and we know what that doesn't look like. But to write it down and to agree it with one another is not just something we do with our confirmation kids when we have a kind of an agreement that those of us who have been catechists over the years will be used to doing that thing. We should be doing this as 46-year-old adults when we're in the parish or on a Wednesday night, right? I am going to commit to have respectful conversation. I'm going to receive other contributions as gift. There's always going to be something of value in what other people are saying. We're going to seek understanding of one another. We don't always have to be in agreement, right? Curiosity is a really good disposition to encourage in a group. Let's get curious about what one another is saying rather than judgmental about what one another is saying, right? One person speaking at a time. Let's not have side conversations, right? And we monitor our airtime. Now, I often say in a kind of working meeting, that's 60 seconds. If you can't say what you're going to say in 60 seconds, maybe think a bit more before we speak. If we're having a conversation in the spirit that we might be having in a parish council, we might say, well, that's 2 to 3 minutes that we're going to say in this round, okay? But we're clear about how we're doing it. And I would share a working together agreement as we're forming a group, and I'd have a copy of it visible as we go through. So I would recommend this. I'd also include something about timekeeping. We start and finish on time. I'd include something about confidentiality. Personal details that are shared in a room are usually to remain confidential, but any ideas are for learning, for sharing. And lastly, I'd include something about interruptions. What are we going to do with our electronics? Are they out of sight? Are they switched off? How are we going to do that? Let's agree it as a group. And again, we we can form this into a code of conduct, expectations of how many meetings you turn up to a year. Do you miss, if you miss more than half, you're not showing commitment. There's lots of things we can do, but it has to come from the group themselves, Avril, to actually form this yourself, take a template like mine or somebody else's and work with it, and to think, what do we expect of one another when we're showing up in order to have a safe space where people can participate fully, right? So it sounds almost like we're working with young people when we're doing this, but I would really, really recommend it across the age boards that we do it together and have these working together agreements and codes of conduct. Is that useful?
Super useful. I think it's really helpful, and I think it's helpful when it gets generated out of the group, and that's
Yeah,
that actually, what kind of a meeting do I want to turn up to,
yeah,
and what one group when I was working with them said there must always be biscuits, and that actually was as important to them as anything else.
yeah,
But I think the stuff about confidentiality is really important. It's amazing how people don't always pick up on that. And you want there to be a space to think things differently that doesn't necessarily then get talked about in the pews, or over coffee at the
exactly.
next service.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple of other tools, just very quickly, that you could use, because a common understanding of how you're working, the way you're going to show up, right, is really useful. So I'm just going to do these very quickly because you can kind of Google all of this stuff. But we talk about values a lot. One tool I really like to use is Patrick Lencioni's tool of the 4 different types of values which show up. He talks about core values, permission to play, aspirational and accidental values. And you can do this as a kind of group piece of work, set half an hour aside and talk about them. What are the core values that make us different to being in a work meeting? What are the core values that make us different to something else, right? Now, for you, that might be gospel values in your parish. It might be collaboration. It might be synodality, right? What are they? They should be set apart from those kind of permission to play values, which are taken as read. You know, in order to be in this space, we're going to be respectful to one another, right? In order to be in this space, we're going to be open and considerate, right? I think that goes as read, but let's at least talk through them. But what is core to our parish council? What's really important to us? And we can have a conversation about it. Then we have our aspirational values, being really honest about the values that we're not there yet. So we might not be fully collaborative yet. We might still be hanging on to our own roles. We might still be, you know, finding it difficult to find a way for everyone to be included, but we're working towards that. Let's be honest about that too. And the other thing we need to be really honest about and identify are those accidental values, which are not cultivated and are often not even recognized. If I was a fly on the wall watching your parish council meetings, what would I see which might not be wanted, right? How is it we're working? Are we all turning up at the last minute, rushing with no prep? Is this a very kind of ad hoc meeting, even though we hope that it's already well prepared? You know what I mean? So what's accidentally creeping into the way we're working? And you can just use that simple matrix to say, we know what's core to how we want to be. Yes, there's some permission to play stuff in order to be in this. This is how we turn up. But I'd get much more curious about the bottom two. Where are we not yet? Right? and what are we accidentally doing that we need to find ways to shift? Again, just Google those 4 types of values and they'll come up. The other thing you could have a quick Google on is what's called the culture canvas, right? Just checking that you can still hear me. It's saying my internet is unstable. Is that okay?
You're
Yeah.
occasionally wobbly, but
Um,
if you go completely on, I'll let you know.
Great. Um, Again, just Google Culture Canvas. I've put the website there for you. Um, and it gives you a whole toolkit of how you can map out the culture that you desire, right? And really interestingly for me, that central column is your core culture. What's your purpose and your values, but also what's your priorities at this time to build the culture that you want, and what behaviors are going to underpin that. Your right-hand column there is your emotional culture. What rituals are going to be important, right? How are you going to celebrate? How are you going to recognize people? How are you going to reward people? What feedback do people need? What behaviors and practices are going to underpin that? And how are you going to keep people safe? What does that look like in your meeting? And again, talk through it, map it. The left-hand side is your more functional stuff. How do you make decisions? How do you have meetings? What norms do you expect? We do 80% of meetings, otherwise we're letting people down, whatever it is, right? And again, it sounds very non-Catholic maybe or very business-like, but I'd say it's the opposite. I'd say this is about actually giving ourselves permission to get beyond the businessy stuff, right? And actually to talk about how we're working and how do we want to work and using working together agreement is simple, but then going a bit deeper, maybe thinking about the values that want to be at play. And if you want to go the full hog, actually mapping out that core culture, the emotional culture, and your kind of functional culture. So there's some tools. You don't need me to explain them fully because there's plenty of stuff online to go away and research them.
I think what you're giving us the opportunity to do tonight, actually, Danny, is um, like as a parish council, or pastoral council, we're always so aware there's like a ton of stuff, or there should be a ton of stuff going on. Like, got to get through this agenda. Sometimes we've got to get through in an hour, no matter what, or portcullis comes down. Actually, what you're doing is giving us permission to focus on ourselves as a group.
Yeah,
And to get off that hamster wheel of the agenda and everything, maybe go away, maybe spend a Saturday afternoon or a day together just reflecting on, how are we behaving and actually what are we modeling to the rest of the parish?
exactly. And culture needs leadership. So if and we can talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but if we see the parish council as having a role in leadership, they're not the only leaders in a parish, but they have a role in leadership. To model that for others is really important. So, we don't want a bickering parish. We don't want a parish that's seeped in gossip and hearsay. We want a parish that is collaborative, loving, caring. So we should be modeling that in the way that we're working. And to take, as you say, to take stock, however we do that, we can build in regular time to do that at the beginning or the end of meetings. We can take some time away to do it. We could do it as a very intentional kind of meeting. Let's come together and just spend 2 hours on how we're working. Because I do think, as you say, Ever, we get bogged down in the what, right? The what we have to do. And it can become actually too business-like. We've taken a lot of really good stuff from the business community over the years, right? And we've got more professional as a church. But actually, if you remember what Pope Francis said at the beginning of the synodal process, this this way of working has something to teach the business world, right? To come together, to listen, to discern, to take a more reflective and spiritual approach to our decision making and decision taking is something that the world needs, right? So the how of how we do that. I think when you do your culture canvas, you're going to have prayer on there. You're going to have reflection on there. You're going to have taking time for one another, building relationships. And maybe we can come on to a little bit of that as we go through as well. Yeah.
I want to dive into frustration, misunderstandings, and personality clashes, or like that is the reality of ourselves as a community. How do we avoid some of the kind of darker stuff that goes on, or just the everyday grit that gets into our kind of relationships? How do we kind of address that within our culture?
Well, I think used one important word is how do we avoid it first? So maybe we can look at how we avoid it and then what we do when it emerges. Avoiding it is about knowing one another, right? So it is about building relationships. So what you're doing outside of the parish council meeting is as important as what you're doing in the meeting, right? So we've got to know one another. We've got to know what's coming into the room, right, when we meet. Um, I think the chair or the co-chairs have a really important role in this, right? So to have times for one-to-ones, to meet people, to have cups of coffee, to discover who people are, right? Not just to rely on the 90 minutes of a meeting, right? But to really build relationships. There's and I think you can do that between parish council members as well. Really get intentional about getting to know one another. So when I was chairing a group recently over a period of time, I used to put a 15-minute slot in at the beginning of meetings when you'd have a one-to-one with somebody different to what you had last time, right? And there'd be a connecting question, right? To share something of your motivations of being part of this group, or tell me something about the story of your faith, or how have you found yourself here at this time of life, in this place, in this parish. So we just get to know each other a bit better, right? I use often a set of questions. Now, again, I'm just giving you tools. I'm not expecting anyone to take all of these tools, but for some people it might resonate, right? So this guy called Michael Stainer, 5 questions to build positive relationships, right? Imagine on a one-to-one level discovering this with different people in your parish council. What's your best? How do you work at your best, right? What are your practices and preferences? What's your style? What can we learn from successful past relationships that you've had? What can we learn from unsuccessful past relationships? What wisdom do you have about past work blunders or past blunders in relationships? And how will we fix things if things go wrong? Right? Just give yourself permission to imagine being the chair of a parish council and knowing the answers to all of those questions to everybody sitting around the table. Right? It gives you a real sense then of how you come together as a team, how you come together to build a culture which is going to allow you to flourish. Say another thing I'd throw in, Avril, and I'm sure this has been not so much overdone because you can't overdone it, but talking about the importance of working synodally. So one of our main synodal tools is conversations in the spirits. Right? If we're doing that regularly, I would say very regularly, right? And Lectio Divina and the other tools that we have in our toolbox, we get to know one another, right? We get to know the stories that people are bringing, and we see beyond the fact that we don't agree with them and whether or not we should be retarmacking the car park, right? We see that they're coming from a really good place when they're talking about they want more for primary school children age group, even though your passion is teenagers. You know, we understand something of the story if we're taking time to listen to people sharing faith and reflecting in conversations in the spirits. So getting to know one another outside of meetings and then inside our meetings, keeping those rich treasures that we have in our toolbox that are not from the business world, but from our world, right? Of reflection, of spirituality, of prayer, and of deep sharing and listening, which enable us to lay the groundwork so we avoid those pitfalls of unhealthy relationships in a parish council.
What's really striking me actually as you're talking is that we almost need to give ourselves permission to take ourselves seriously.
Yeah.
Like, and to say, although we would all say, like it's not ours, it's, we're just serving the parish and everything. If we're going to do this properly, we do actually have to be attentive to relationships. We do have to get to know each other. It isn't just enough to say, well, we'll minimize the commitment needed in order to get people out because we're honoring the fact that they have family lives and work lives and they're very, very busy. But actually, what is going to be more fulfilling, more joy-giving to people is coming to a meeting where they actually like the people they're coming to the
Yeah,
meeting with, where they get to know people, where they can have a laugh with them, where they trust them, where you can fall out a bit and it's okay. You know, you're not going to
yeah,
kind of blow up the parish council if you don't agree with somebody. But you don't get to that if you're just having like an hour-long meeting 4 times a year, do you? It's
yeah,
going to be super functional. So
yeah,
we kind of need
definitely.
to give ourselves permission to say, this is important
Yeah.
to the purpose of the parish to take this stuff seriously.
Definitely. So and in that sense, it is a commitment. You know, that part of the culture that we should be building is a group of committed people to one another and to the mission of the parish. And being committed to one another means knowing one another. We should be going out for meals together. We should be inviting people round a shared table. We should going for cups of coffee, right? And we should be praying together, right? And then we can argue about retarmacking the car park, right? That's gives us a foundation to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I
I,
mean, maybe we should just take a note of what happens when those disagreements do emerge, and when you actually find yourself with kind of difficult behaviour emerging. And again, it's my bread and butter in my professional life as a facilitator, but so I could talk for hours, but just very simply, curiosity is the key here, right? So I'd say we want to get to a point where we're getting curious about the behaviour. But the first step of that is to name what we're seeing in a way which is not judging. So if you are privileged to chair a parish council, try not to blame, try not to put kind of obstacles in people's way, which is getting people's backs up. So, you know, Danny, you're dominating is a very different thing of saying, Danny, I've noticed you're talking a lot, right? They're two very different statements, right? One involves judgment, domination. The other is just a statement of fact. I notice you're talking a lot. So if we can actually say, I notice your voice is getting louder, right? And then get curious, right? I suspect you're quite passionate about what you're talking about, right? But I'm curious if we might want to look at this in a different way, right? Could we hear what other people are saying? Right. It doesn't always work, but it often works by raising people's attention to how they're behaving by just stating kind of data, right? The volume's getting louder in this place. I'm wondering if maybe people are a bit uncomfortable. Maybe we could look if it's okay if somebody else could speak now. And 9 times out of 10, somebody will go, okay, right? Um, or the other thing to do is after we've named something, is to be quite bold and say, I notice that that you're now talking very loudly. I need you to talk quieter, right? So you're still not making any judgment. You're just saying what you need, right? And again, if there's two people arguing in a meeting, right, and it's not going anywhere and it's becoming fruitless, right? Just so I noticed that this is becoming very dominated by two people. There's two people talking a lot. I'm wondering if you could just say very simply what it is that you're saying and what you need from the other person, right? And then say to the other person, can you just tell me what you've heard from this person? So just simple things of rather than saying stop or you're all wrong or we've got to move on, right? Of getting curious about it, but starting with the facts without too much judgment, and then inviting people into a space of kind of curiosity and almost experimenting. Could we try something different? Could we look at this in a different way? Now, if it all goes to pot, there's plenty of other tools out there, but I don't want this to be a training on facilitation. This is about the culture. So I think it's something around noticing how things are and inviting people themselves to notice it. That's the culture that we want. We want people to become more and more aware about how they are. And if we can, in our own roles that we have on the parish council, invite people to do that, we're probably building the culture that we want.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. And actually, it doesn't always do us any harm to have a little bit of conflict. You know, I think
Absolutely.
we get so worried about arguing, it doesn't feel very Christian. Well, they
Yeah,
argued all the time through Acts. They were always disagreeing with each other. And, like
yeah,
to say, I don't hold the truth on this. Who's got the other perspective from me? Who do I need to hear? Who needs to chip a bit off my idea in order to make it a better idea? I
yeah,
think if we're a bit more confident, we can actually move to a better working group, can't we?
definitely. Yeah. And yeah, and disagreement is not bad. And everyone not being in agreement is not bad. It's only when it becomes personal, or we start to not value what other people are saying. If that working together agreement, that actually I'm going to treat everyone's contribution as a gift, there's always going to be invalue in what somebody is saying, even if they're opposed to what I'm saying. Let's get curious about that. And I think it's what the conversation, the spirit methodology gives us, right? So actually to really deeply listen to one another, stand aside from our own agenda and deeply listen to one another is what we should be doing as a member of a parish council.
Mm. And actually I think, this is something I've learned from you is to ask somebody I don't really share your view on this, but I'm fascinated to know what makes you so passionate. And then often somebody will tell you a story, which then you go, oh my gosh, now I understand it. Like I still
Yeah,
don't agree,
yeah,
but now
yeah,
I can get you're not a nutcase. You have a perfectly good reason for that.
yeah.
Let's look at the sort of standing aside and things like that then. So what do you think those kind of everyday practices could be, like the tone, the spirit, how we work together, that we can really kind of bring into our meetings?
I mean, I think there's a lot that we can bring in. I mean, I use some people know, there's some people on this call that know this, but I've been involved in developing these 5 principles of accompaniment. I think they're incredibly helpful, right? There's a website there. This was put together. Amy, who's on the call, David Wells, Albert Christopher Jameson. There's a big group of us that have worked with 300 people across the church just to kind of put this together. We haven't made these up. You're already doing this, but they're really useful for a parish council to really know that the Spirit of God is present. We know that from our work in synodality. We know the Spirit of God is present in other people. But if we really believe that, there has to be time in our meetings when we stand aside. When we stand aside from our deeply held agendas. Pope Francis called them our preconceived judgments, right? We stand aside from that. And we can do that, but it's hard to do it. Parish priest last night admitted to his parish council, it's hard for him to do it at times, but it's a choice that we stand aside from things. And then to choose to tune in to the divine. I think, and I said what I've already said, one of the tools in our toolkit is our conversations in the spirit. They should be part of our parish councils, that we tune into that. We go gradually, we don't need to rush, right? So one of the things about our culture should be that we don't have to rush to the destination, right? We can go one step at a time, right? And that's so empowering to a group of people that might feel the weight of the parish on their shoulders to know that one step at a time is enough, right? But we're always moving towards the flourishment of others, towards the growth of others. And I can share that, but you can get that from accompany.co.uk. So I find that almost as useful as a working together agreement. What is it that we're actually practical? And these are all really practical, because when I start to get agitated, I've got to remind myself the Spirit of God is in you, Avril, right? And I'm going to stand aside from my own agenda so I really listen to what you're saying, right? And I can do that. I've got the tools to do that. I've got the ability to do that. Um, and then I think things like having a chair, right? Possibly having a co-chair really helps. I think things like, and I've stolen this from you and the work that the School for Synodality have done, the role of an accompanier on a parish council. So somebody that isn't a member of the council, but can come on and really be a useful kind of friend and companion, particularly to the chairs, right? But also to other members. So not coming to every meeting, but available outside of meetings and inside of meetings to really bring a bit of insight. There'll be people in your parish that are used to mentoring or coaching. There'll be religious sisters perhaps, or people that have experienced some spiritual direction that can just have bring that different viewpoint. So don't just think you've got to do it all by yourself, but invite somebody to accompany you, not your PP, somebody else, somebody to accompany that group of people. Um, and then just taking the time to be intentional about what you're doing, right? So I don't need to talk about all the mechanics because you'll do that elsewhere, but having your agendas, right? Preparing well, right? Having that absolute commitment to good preparation, turning up, being there for the 30 minutes of coffee before we start, right? Not skipping the prayer, right? So that we're laying the foundations so that when we get to the work, we're kind of in it together. Um, I've forgotten your question.
Well, and Danny, I am looking at the time and thinking, oh my gosh, I know you and I could talk about this stuff all night, but I do want to be able to open
Let's carry on.
up to questions. So I want
Yeah.
to move to the last question, which is say if there's one thing that pastoral councils did starting out tomorrow that could really improve their culture, what would it be?
Um, I mean, I'm going to say prayer, right? Because I've been to far too many parish meetings where prayer is not even a second thought. You know what I mean? It just feels like we just jump straight into the business. I noticed in chat from Joe there that, you know, it doesn't mean to say that it's business like Joe, but it might be that we end up just going straight to the what, right? And I think if we do take more time to pray together, it doesn't always have to be in the meeting. It could be a time when the council goes away to pray, to take time to pray at other times, but to really be a praying community as well as a working community. Yeah.
I really, really agree with that. I mean, some of the groups that I'm working with in my diocese, we are trying to discern the future of parish, of church buildings and things, really, really tough decisions. And we can only do that because we spend significant amounts of time in prayer. And
Mm.
then we know that what we're saying is coming from that place of prayer and we can support one another. So I 100% agree with that. Just going to open up to questions and allow people to put things in the chat there. But I do want to pick up on Joe's comment because I think it's a really interesting one of being too business-like. I have been in meetings where I think we've been so action-oriented, we haven't they can easily get dominated by people. But
Mm.
I do want to pick up on what you think, Danny, about that the synodal tools are too oriented to softer character types and they exclude kind of active or achiever types. I'm thinking that Joe probably is a fairly, and Joe, this is a horrific stereotype of a person I've never met, so I do apologize. But I'm thinking you probably are somebody who just wants to get on and do things. And what are we doing? Praying, having coffee with each other? Are you kidding me? I've already got to come 15 minutes early for the prayer. Now I have to come 15 minutes before that to talk to somebody. What, Danny, are you mad? So, what do we do about those people who would say, that's just not for me? Like, I can't come to that kind of a meeting. I need to just be getting on with things.
I think, I mean, some people might be like that, and it might be very unfair to invite people into that more. And I'm sure Joe is a very relational person, so we'll depersonalize it, Joe. But there are people that might not want that. Um, but I think I used to be like that, Avril. I wanted to just get things done, and actually the practice of a more relational approach and an approach which is rooted in the spirit of God and discernment has shifted things for me. And I find it really freeing, particularly that we don't have to always know the destination. We don't always have to know the answers and we discern that together. I don't think that means that we can't still be active and achievers, right? You can still come in, that thing about speaking boldly, right? In the synodal way of working, we still speak boldly. I really want something to happen for young people in this parish. We've been talking about it for years. I want it to happen, right? And we should be coming in with that passion, but we just need to create the space to hear other people as well. I think there is a danger though, and there's some real wisdom in Joe's question. There is a danger that we end up just not allowing those voices to come through, right? So as chair, you need to ensure that we're laying the ground so those people that have bold ideas, that want to talk about what they want to talk about, have that space. And part of that actually is around the chair knowing the group, right? Actually know what's on people's hearts. Know that people are frustrated with the way that it's working, right? Get their ideas. How else could we do this, right? Really get to know the group. And there are different personality types and different ways of working. So if we understand the styles of working, we can shift things up so that. And the other thing to say is that maybe if somebody doesn't want to be involved in the spiritual, more reflective side, there's still a role for them, right? We can have other groups working on projects, right? Coming into the parish council and bringing their business plan in and telling us about it. We need those skills as well, but we also need the space for communal discernment in the spirit of God. Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, David Wells once said of me, if I was in charge of joy, I'd have a committee and an 8-point action plan, which, because I am very always wanting to say, what is the strategy? Where are we
Yeah.
going? But I have also found that you just make better decisions. It's deeper, it's more reflective, it's more surprising. It's not the obvious that you thought you were going to talk about when you went in there. I also find it really, really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm very keen that we pick up on Alison's comment. Lovely to hear from Sue that introducing prayer has made a difference in their meetings. That's a kind of validation of what we're both saying. But Alison says, can you give some advice about facilitating the relationship between the PPC and the rest of the parish?
Yeah, I suppose it's a very broad question. I mean, I think I am encouraging my parish at the moment to think about kind of an all-comers day, whatever you want to call it, right? So that it isn't just a group of people discerning very, very well, listening to other people, bringing stuff into the room, but actually we find a way of really extending that. Now, that could be once a year, it could be once a term, um, but really creating that opportunity for people to come and be part of the conversation, the discernment, right? So to have regular events like that is good. I think the other thing we need to be doing more of, Alison, is telling the story,
Mm.
right? We need to have time post communion, whenever, when we are with our Sunday mass goers saying, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is why we're doing it, right? Come and talk to us, right? And to have different ways of engaging. So I'm a big fan of disrupting the back of churches with big interactive kind of activities, so that someone can stick a sticker on something as they're going out, or someone can come and write a note or whatever. So you can't, and having the council visible, so people can talk to them. Um, I think getting creative so it feels different, maybe once every 6 months or once a term or once a year will really help people go, "Oh, who are these people? I'd quite like to understand a bit more." And the other aspect to that, Alison, is just continuing to extend the invitation, right? Most parishes don't have enough people engaged, right? So let's just keep extending the invitation. If you want to come and see what we're doing, come and turn up, come and be with us, right? If that's not comfortable to everyone, then create those moments when you're going to have open meetings where people are going to come in and be with you. I don't know. It's just an attempt at an answer.
I belonged to a parish years ago when I was a student that had an annual Thanksgiving day,
Yeah,
and they would say, these are what were our priorities for the last year. This is what we've done. This is how we've spent your money. And we want to reflect on, and we are very grateful and we thank God for all of that. And now we want to think, are our priorities changing? Has something happened? And if that's the case, are we going to support it? And it felt very engaging, that there was a kind of a real desire to find out what people's priorities were. And a little bit for the parish to say, this isn't just for me to turn up on Sunday, there's
yeah,
actually so much going on,
yeah.
which I think was really helpful.
I've done that very simply. You know those things you get in supermarkets where you have to put your coins in different kind of charities? I've kind of done that as in voting. I've kind of done that with ping pong balls in big vases at the back of church. What's most important to you? It's amazing. Just doing something different will help engage people, and it just creates conversation. So as long as the people are around that, however you do that, the people being around that voting station or that comment station, then you can have the conversations and build the relationships between the PPC and the rest of the parish.
And I think we've got time for one last question if anybody who's on would like to throw one in. But just thinking about that, I think that also that modeling that we were talking about, where the PPC is modeling leadership to the rest of the parish, actually is about our demeanor. It is about a servant mentality, isn't it? And that the importance of looping back and the communication back to the
Yeah.
parish.
And I suppose we've talked a lot about the how, because that is what culture is. How are we doing things around here? And I've distinguished that from the what. So we're not you know the what is what we're doing. It's just how we're doing it. So I'm not saying the what isn't important, but the other aspect to all of this is the why. And we kind of think we know the why because it's our mission, it's the gospel, but actually coming back to that why every now and then, right, will drive the how, right?
Mm.
So if why have we got a parish council? Is it for our own benefit or is it for service? Right? And to take time to do that, that's gonna really um, kind of fuel your culture. So to touch base on that and to get other people's opinions. So again, that's another way to build relationships. What should we be for? Take that question to the rest of the parish. What should we be for? What do you want to see us doing? Right? And to model that kind of style of listening and collaborative working across the parish will help, I think, link the parish and the PPC as well.
Danny, we've run out of time. Thank you so much, though. Super, super helpful. And I think um, culture can be one of those really slippery, difficult things. You know it when it's good, it's hard to fix when it's not. But I think you've given us some really practical steps and ways of thinking about that tonight. And also given us a little bit of pride, like, come on, people, we are parish councils. We've got a purpose, we've got a mission. We can spend time in thinking about this. So yeah, thank you so much. It's been really, really helpful.
It's been
Um,
a pleasure.
to finish off our evening, I'm just going to hand back to Chris, who is going to just lead us in a final prayer.
Abba, we place into your hands our parish communities. In a world of rapid change, enable us to be your body on earth, speaking your word to the world. Help us to move from defending what is ours to sharing with others the gifts you give us. Enable our communities to be places where no one is forgotten, where your word is boldly proclaimed, where the hungry are nourished and your love is clearly seen. Give us the wisdom to listen, the humility to learn, the courage to change, and the gentleness to love. For without you, we can do nothing. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to all who've joined us online. I just want to flag up our next meeting, which is on the 10th of Feb. And we've got Father Matthew Nunes from Liverpool Archdiocese, who is going to help us. We're going to move from the practical to the spiritual. But I don't think we ever left the spiritual, but we were just exploring it through a different lens tonight. So it would be lovely to see everybody in a month's time. And thank you again to Danny for a really fabulous presentation and evening. Thanks, everybody.